friends, and thanks for joining me again. And it's May, so it's time for us to plant our gardens, or at least here where I live. Over the next, few weeks is when we'll probably be planting some of our warm weather crops and everything else out in the garden. Unfortunately, on all of the seed packets, there's all this terminology. Non-GMO, heirloom, organic, hybrid, all this stuff. And there seems to be a lot of confusion about what each of these specific terms mean, and it can be a little bit difficult to make sure that we're choosing what actually works for our gardens and our homesteads. And really it can, be different depending on what your actual goals are. So I would like to go through the different terminologies and kind of help you figure out which ones are the best ones to choose for your garden so that you can best fit your needs and, achieve your goals. So the first thing I want to talk about is open pollinated. Open pollinated just means it's any crop that has a flower that's open so that insects, the wind, even humans can pollinate those types of crops. Most crops are open pollinated. So this is going to be a whole lot of the crops that we already have in our garden. This is going to be stuff like tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchini and eggplants and all these things with flowers. One thing you want to note though is it isn't possible to keep open pollinated crops from cross-pollinating. If you were to plant two varieties of something right next to each other, a long skinny eggplant and a big thick eggplant, and they both have their flowers open at the same time, a bee is probably going to come along and then visit one of the flowers on one plant and then one of the flowers on the other plant. And this is actually going to make it to where each of those plants has now been cross-pollinated as the bee goes from one to the next and then back and forth. So, open pollinated crops can't be stopped from being cross-pollinated unless you plant them really far away. I'll talk more about why this is an important thing to remember in a few minutes. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be hybrid, and that's exactly what I just talked about. It's basically when the pollen comes from, one plant to another variety, and those two cross, and this can be done either by humans or just naturally in nature. Again, the example of the bees would totally apply here, but humans can also do it. They can take, I've seen a lot of them do it with like makeup brushes or different things, or even Q-tips, take the pollen and then put it on a different plant and then cross-pollinate that way. Hybrid plants are usually cross-pollinated because they're trying to achieve desired traits in the plants. A good example of this would be two beans, okay, so green beans. There's this variety that grows woody, tasteless beans, but it's really productive and grows a ton of beans. There's this other green bean that grows really tasty, tender beans, but they really don't produce a lot. So they'll cross the two, and then they'll get the desired traits from both. So now you get a new product, that's tasty, tender beans, but then they grow a lot more than the first variety. You see what I'm saying? So, hybridization is done completely naturally. It's just done by crossing the pollen of the two plants to create a new plant. It is good to important to note though that if you save the seeds from a hybrid plant like this, they usually don't grow the same as their parents. This is a huge misconception I feel in the homesteading community, is that people believe that you can't save the seeds from hybrid plants. You can. Anything that's open pollinated, you can save the seeds from those plants and plant them again, and they will grow, but they may not grow the same. So say you took that same green bean I just gave an example of, and then you saved the seeds from it, you planted it next year, those next season's beans may taste more woody, or they may taste or be, they may taste good but then not grow as good of, a crop. So that sort of thing. They may lose some of those desired traits when you plant them on their second year, but they will grow. They just may not grow true to their first variety. Personally, I don't think that hybrid crops are something to be afraid of at all. In fact, I am a huge fan of them because there are certain, crops that can be difficult to grow. Cucumbers are really easy to succumb to all sorts of diseases. They can get powdery mildew, they can get all sorts of different fungus diseases and things like that. And when I have planted hybrid crops of these cucumbers that are bred to be, more disease resistant, I end up getting plants that are more robust and disease resistant. So the only time that honestly I think that these types of crops should be avoided is when they're for people who really want to save the seeds from these plants and they want the variety that they're growing this year to be the same as the variety they grow next year so that they'll continue to grow true. The next one would be heirloom. Heirloom, there is a lot of controversy as to what an heirloom actually is, but basically it just means that it's a heritage breed. of a plant that's been around for a long time. It does not mean that this has never been hybridized. It just means that they've been hybridized a long time ago, and then now they're really producing true to their, the parent plants each year after that. So usually, and it depends on the different companies that you go through, but they say they have to be at least 50 years old. Some other companies say that their varieties are 100 years old or more. It just means that they're varieties that have been passed down through the generations and that their varieties are old. So again, that doesn't mean they've never been hybridized. So a lot of people choose heirloom varieties thinking that they're the only ones that are actually going to be something that you can save the seeds from and have them grow the next year. That's not true actually, because almost any open pollinated, seeds or plants can grow again the next year. A good example of this would be like a tomato plant, a Roma tomato. There are lots of Roma tomatoes out there that are not heirloom varieties, but if you save the seeds, they'll grow exactly like the heirloom next year, and they're not, again, necessarily heirloom varieties. I have had some issues with heirlooms over the years as I've been going through them. It seems like a few years ago there was this huge heirloom craze. Oh, heirlooms are great, they're the only right choice for people who want to save all their seeds and all this. And then a whole bunch of gardeners grew a bunch of heirlooms and ended up somewhat disappointed because of some of the other plants that they have been growing were, hybrids and different things like that. And so when they grew these heirloom varieties, they had problems with diseases that were eliminated more through the hybridization. They grow this tomato plant and they baby it along all year. I had a friend who did this, and they got one tomato off that plant because it just wasn't a heavy producer. Whereas a lot of the other varieties out there are much more heavy producing. Not all heirlooms are bad, however. I've had some really good ones. I've had some really good heirloom beans and things like that that are tasty. They're really, heavy producers and those sorts of things. So heirlooms aren't necessarily bad, but they do have some risk because some of them can come with problems that have been eliminated, again, through some of the other plant breeding techniques. So the next one I want to talk about is GMO, which is one of the things that a lot of the heirloom seed companies always claim their seeds are free from. GMO stands for genetically modified organism, and the way that these are different than a hybrid would be that it has genes that are spliced into it in a very unnatural way. So instead of it being two beans that were crossed together, it's corn that they've added bacteria and fish genes into. That's the real way that they actually genetically modify corn, by the way. They take fish and bacteria genes and they use a gene gun and they basically splice those genes into it so that its DNA now actually has fish and bacteria genes in the corn genes. And this has caused some problems. It's controversial. Some people say it's totally safe. They've tested it and so it's safe. Other people say, well, the companies themselves tested it and they're the ones who stand to make the profit from it. So even if they had findings that said that it wasn't safe, then that's not really trustworthy. These sorts of things. And whether or not they're safe is definitely not the point of this video. But I do want to say that A, they are controversial. B, they are not available to home gardeners. There is no seed company out there who markets their plants to home gardeners that actually sells GMO seeds. The reason why some people put on their packets GMO free, honestly, is a marketing tactic. It's a marketing technique that they use to try to get people to choose their packets over the other. There are two packets of seeds. One is labeled GMO free, one isn't. The one that's labeled GMO free is twice the price, and so people will choose that because they assume that the other one is, GMO then. That's not actually true. Again, it's just a marketing technique that they're using to try to get you to buy their product over someone else's. So unless you are a big commercial farm and you're buying, huge bags of seeds that are corn, soy, these types of things, stuff that's, frequently genetically modified, it's very unlikely that you're going to get anything with any kind of, GMO genes or contamination. There is a chance, though, that every seed company out there could have seeds that have some GMO contamination, just really quick, because if there's a big commercial farm that's growing a GMO corn, and then there's a seed company who grows, crops just to grow for seed, and they grow corn on their farm too, some of the, genetically modified corns, pollen could blow over into the other side and then it gets contaminated. But again, this is actually pretty unlikely when it comes to the seed companies and things, but honestly, this can come to any company. It can come to, it can contaminate hybrid seeds. It can, contaminate pretty much anything that's open pollinated again. And then the last one is going to be organic. There are 3 things that it takes in order for a seed company to claim that their stuff is organic. And actually the criteria for a seed company is the same as the regular food that we buy from the grocery store. They have to be pesticide-free, herbicide-free, and commercial fertilizer-free. So there are certain pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers that you can use on organic seeds and organic crops, but they have to be approved. So, you know, they can still use their tactics to help get rid of the pesticide or the pests and things. They just can't use like commercial, you know, really like unhealthy, you know, products and things like that. So there you go. There's all the stuff that usually appears on those seed packets so that you can better, you know, make the most informed choice for what's actually going to work for your backyard homestead, your big homestead, you know, even just your small backyard garden, etc. So you can best choose the seeds that will produce the plants that will best, you know, help you achieve your goals. So happy gardening, and I'll see you next time. I'm Frugal Green Girl. Thanks for watching.